Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the TSO Digital Stage. My name is Ben Nisbet, and I am joined today by the music director of the Tucson Symphony Orchestra, José Luis Gomez, all the way from the Canary Islands in Spain. Hello, Jose. How are you?
Hi Ben, nice to see you again.
You too. Today, we are going to present to you a little concert preview for an upcoming concert that you will see featuring members of the Tucson Symphony Orchestra string sections, in performance of selections from Tchaikovsky's string sextet, also known as the Souvenir de Florence, and a string quintet by Anton Bruckner. Jose, let's just briefly introduce this program. How did this come together, and what was the impetus behind presenting this concert?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's nice to see you. It's nice to see everybody who's watching us. This is exciting every time that we have recordings to be released, and especially these ones because the idea behind it was to find pieces that are a little bit offset in the sense that they are off the track of normal chamber music, even though one of them, the sextet of Tchaikovsky, is a very well-established piece in the repertoire. But somehow once you get away from the four-element ensemble, like a quartet or trio, three people, when you get to six, when you get to seven, when you get to five, it's a little bit, different in the sense of, many composers have done them, like, with the sextet, Brahms, Tchaikovsky. But when it goes to certain composers, some of them, it's a little bit strange. Why did they approach this particular ensemble? And this was the case of Tchaikovsky and the case, more important, of Anton Bruckner, which in this case is a string quintet. So mainly it was the curiosity of trying to showcase pieces that are a little bit special by themselves because of the history behind, because of the ensemble itself, and moreover, the music, it's incredibly beautiful and incredibly interesting, I think, for the players and for you you will be listening. So those were the two things that I was thinking when we decided to select Tchaikovsky and Bruckner.
And isn't it also the case that we are kind of trying to present works for smaller ensembles that also somehow give a representation or the feeling of something that feels bigger and more orchestral, right? So just doing a string quartet or a trio, like you mentioned, is one thing, and it's wonderful in its own way, but we wanted to try to emulate something a little bit bigger than that by presenting some of these pieces, right?
It is true, and actually that is a very clear intention, with these ensembles, when it goes away from those standard 3 people, 4 people ensembles that more or less, when we think about chamber music, we immediately think about that. But when we think about sextets, quintets, septets, or octets, like Mendelssohn, or nonets, those are the things that maybe impulse a little bit the composers into thinking more as an orchestra, and therefore for us is an opportunity also to showcase that, since orchestral music is something that we're missing a lot during this pandemic season. So this is an opportunity to bring you some of that, texture of a bigger ensemble kind of a feeling.
Both of these pieces come from periods in the lives of their respective composers of great success, of great, where they're really kind of doing some of their best work. In the case of Tchaikovsky, this piece was written in the summer of 1890, although it was premiered about 2 years later. But this comes after the Fourth and Fifth Symphonies, and around the same time as his great opera, Queen of Spades, and then also probably his most famous, beloved piece worldwide, the Nutcracker Ballet. What are some of the things that you hear in this piece from thematic content, from style, all these different things that really, really remind you of Tchaikovsky, speaking specifically of the second movement, which is what our audience is going to hear?
Yes, well, the first thing that it's noticeable and is one of the biggest assets of Tchaikovsky as a composer is the melody, the use of a melody. He, in my personal opinion, is one of those composers that deals with the melody better than anyone else. I think maybe only Mozart you could pair, and no wonder why Tchaikovsky's, let's say, idol or god was Mozart. Both of them have an incredible talent and command of the melody. So this particular movement, it's a slow movement. It's a cantabile movement. It's just about melody. It's just a dialogue between the cello and the violin, and it's incredibly beautiful. And when you hear Tchaikovsky's music, you always remember those melodies. I think they kind of strike you immediately, and they stay with you. It's one of those earworms somehow that this earworm quality or capacity that his music has. This is in a very superficial way, but because the melody itself, it has many nuances and many of these singing qualities that it makes sense, with the fact that he was also composing an opera at that time, the Big Dame, Queen of Spades. It's like Yevgeny Onegin are operas that display the full lyric aspect of melody writing. It could be compared even to the Italian operas, but I think in that case, Tchaikovsky was, exploring the use of a melody to an extent that I think it set also a tone for Russian music, which composers like Rachmaninoff kind of followed after. But this Souvenir of Florence, it's all about melody. It's an incredible, beautiful melody example.
I'm glad that you mentioned the prominence of the violin and the cello, of course, performed beautifully by our concertmaster Lauren Roth and our principal cello, Ann Gratz. That's actually sort of how this piece started. He was sketching sort of this duet between those two instruments, which I would imagine is probably what ended up being the second movement of this piece that our audience will hear. But there's so much more than that. He sets this beautiful scene, and let's remember the usage of the term souvenir as we sort of think about it in the English language is like something like a piece of something that you use to remember something by. But I think probably more accurately in this case, the souvenir is the memory itself. Tchaikovsky spent a lot of time in Italy. He loved to escape the harsh Russian winters for the more warm and sunny climate of Italy. He loved to go to Venice, he loved to go to Rome, but particularly he loved Florence. And he's really setting a scene here in almost an operatic way. The pizzicato of the second violin and the viola and the second viola as well kind of sounds like a guitar, sounds like a mandolin that's accompanying this melody. And then you also have this incredibly lush and melodic support from the bottom of the second cello. Tchaikovsky is very detail-oriented here in the service of trying to set a scene, right?
Absolutely, and I think this is probably the movement that adapts better to the Italian idea in the sense of we imagine and it's not that far from reality, but we imagine the Italian music always to be sung and always to be accompanied with some kind of string instrument, in this case, like a serenata, like a serenade with a guitar, with a mandolin that you were saying. So this is a very good example of how great Tchaikovsky was as a composer, also to describe things. Again, it might be very simplistic just to say that's the only thing, but it clearly stands out, as an element of the composition itself. And yeah, he wrote another piece that I love to conduct called Capriccio Italiano, so Italian Caprice, and that has, in some sections, has those elements of, how the Italians, let's just say, handle the melody, but with this Russian, incredibly beautiful and elegant Russian flavor. Not to say that Italians are not elegant, I think they are very elegant themselves, but I think Tchaikovsky has that element of this aristocratic Russia that that we kind of relate to at the end of the 19th century, and that he was part of, and his music actually compared to other composers that happened after him had that kind of sense of nostalgia. So that's why the souvenir also applies very well, because it's like remembering with feelings, something, a place. So I'm sure Firenze for him, as many other places, had a strong personal feeling for him, and this is, this is something that it could be easily understood through his letters, that he was sending to his supporter, and he's always speaking with feelings, and I think after the words, then his music is the best example of that, that feelings writing, that that the words can say.
It is funny. This, like you said, this is like the most Italian movement of this piece. That is a memory of Italy. The rest of the piece is really Russian, right? Like the third and fourth movements in particular are. It's like Russian folk melodies. It's got that sort of very like heavy kind of folk dance almost feel to it. But this is pure bel canto, beauty, sung melodies type of material. It's wonderful music, and I can't wait for our audiences to experience it. If you haven't heard this piece before, and in particular this second movement, it's one of the absolute gems of romantic chamber music writing. Let's talk a little bit about the Bruckner. Before we talk about the piece itself, Jose, just run down briefly, if you can, I know that's not very easy to do, what you would like the audience to know about Bruckner, the man and the composer.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Bruckner, it's one of those composers that personally I think, they represent something very massive. And it's not because of the music that he wrote that it was always written for a big orchestra or for a chorus, or, his instrument was the organ. So the sound heftiness was the primordial necessity, that create this density. The density of the sound is very important in Bruckner's music. So I want the audience to switch a little bit of what they think of Bruckner and try to apply the same things that maybe they hear from certain work that they experience, like the Seventh Symphony when we played at the TSO a couple of seasons ago, or the Te Deum, or any other works that they maybe know because you have heard it before, and then hear the quintet. Then you start to see similarities, because in the case of this quintet, and I'm sure you're going to say it after, this is not a student piece. This is something that is the Bruckner that was already, the accomplished Bruckner composer. Even though, accomplished was never, a word that pairs with his personal life, because he felt, and the history also says that he was very unfortunate on getting approval from many of his colleagues or the critics. Nonetheless, this is a piece that kind of translates a little bit into a minor scale of the density of a full orchestra to a string quintet that has a second viola. So this is also interesting immediately, so that I want everybody to identify the differences between, thinking that, you have a quintet that can have, two cellos. And that sometimes, is a little bit the tendency. I think in this case, he wanted to have the viola also to show more of the inner voices. He was, as being an organist, he was a master of improvisation and to create counterpoint, like, Bach. So I think in this case is one of those examples, and particularly the finale, which is a very, very interesting movement. I want everybody to sit down and listen carefully to this piece. This is a piece that needs to be listened more than once. Not that any of the other pieces that we play, they shouldn't be, but this one, I want people to listen it over and over, because the more you listen to it, the more you discover all of these structures inside.
Yeah, while the Tchaikovsky is very lyrical and very sort of, both pieces are beautiful, but that's sort of the operative word for the Tchaikovsky. This is full of counterpoint and exciting rhythm and very, very interesting harmonic changes. He really kind of veils the home key quite a lot with lots of accidentals and very interesting chords. And then, of course, at the very, very end, and this is, I think, the one thing that I'd like people to really pay attention to, he really goes into Bruckner's symphonic mode. The strings are playing, some of the strings are playing a very heavy tremolo, and you have these big, huge melodies in the violin. He really is making an attempt to take this 5-piece ensemble and turn it into an orchestra or an organ, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's in a minor scale, he's creating one of those famous codas at the end of his symphonies. If many of our listeners are, I hope they are, familiar with some of the Bruckner symphonies, they have many, very clear characteristics. First, the music itself, it speaks about Bruckner, but also, the adagios, the way he wrote, beautiful, slow, and dense music. That's something that is very typical from Bruckner music. but also the codas, so the endings of the symphonies. He always left kind of, the last maybe minute and a half or something, or maybe even more. Sometimes there were really long, endings that prepare and created an excitement for the end. And with those resources, with tremolos, which means repeating notes, repeating the same note with the fast stroke of the bow, that creates that reverberance sense that I think it applies to that particular and very clear characteristic of Bruckner's inner world, which is the church. He was a Catholic, and he lived physically and also spiritually in the church. So every single piece that he wrote was to praise, the divinity, to praise the spirituality of the Catholicism in this case, and that it's done through these special resources, and I think the endings are very typical of Bruckner, and this ending of this quintet is no different from the symphonies. It's in minor scale, in the sense of it doesn't have that amount of players on stage, but it has the same intensity and the same character.
This piece was written around 1878, 1879, which places it rather close in terms of his compositional output to the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies. One thing that I'd like for you to do, José, would be to make some recommendations for our audience. If they're not familiar with some of the more important canonic works of Bruckner, do you have any must-listen symphonies or works by Bruckner, and maybe even a couple of key recordings that you really enjoy?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a big fan of Bruckner. I believe that it's one of those composers that, again, like the quintet, the more you hear it, the more you start to learn, but also to discover many things. Any composer is like that, but Bruckner specifically, it is one of those, because it can be at the beginning, it can look like very massive and very square, but when you start to dig into every single nuances, then you start to think that, okay, this is an architecture. It's like going to a church and discovering all these beautiful small pieces, in the columns or the vetrate, the windows, and you start to discover all these beauties. I think Bruckner's music is about that. The symphonies that I recommend, there is two of them that we played at the TSO, the Romantic, number 4, and number 7. Those, no wonder why they were both, they were very famous during his time, and those two symphonies, 4 and 7, are a good introduction to Bruckner's music. I think that Te Deum that he wrote for 4 voices, chorus, and orchestra, it's a very good also piece for a newcomer into the Bruckner work to listen to how also he dealt with using the voices, because an organ has that kind of quality in a way to translate a little bit of a resonance of the voice as well, because it uses air. And another symphony that I really enjoy and I really like. I love them all. There are 9 symphonies plus number 0, so he has 10 edited symphonies. And but it's number 9. It's his last symphony. It's unfinished, and it has an incredibly beautiful last movement, this beautiful adagio, and it's just an example how the direction his music was taking. He was admired, by Mahler. He was admired by the people who were writing music in that kind of density. Recordings that I love from my mentor, from Pablo Jarvi, with the Frankfurt Radio Symphony, that I happened to be in some of those recordings myself while I was assisting him, especially the 2nd Symphony and the 8th Symphony. Other recordings that are very important for a music lover to listen to are the ones of the Gunther Wand, a fantastic German conductor from the past that did wonderful recordings of all Bruckner symphonies with the NDR Hamburg, so the Radio Orchestra of Hamburg. They're all beautiful. They're a very good example. There is the historical, fantastic recordings of Celibidache and the Munich Philharmonic. These are particular by themselves because of the relationship that the famous conductor Sergiu Celibidache and this orchestra established. It's just it's one of those relationships like Karajan and Berlin Philharmonic, like Lerner Bernstein and New York Phil. Well, Shelley Vidake and Munich, he created the sound of their orchestra that even now when you listen to it, even though there's being other conductors being the music directors, it carries that characteristics, especially because of the treatment that they gave to the Bruckner's music, which is density and weight. You know, there is a lot of these, you know, characteristics in those recordings, especially in the ones of the Munich Philharmonic and Shelley Vidake.
Well, we can't thank you all enough for joining us today for this concert preview of Tchaikovsky and Bruckner. Jose, thank you very much for your time. Of course, if you're watching this, you're probably on the Tucson Symphony Orchestra website and you're seeing all of the different offerings that we have for you with our digital stage. We have so many wonderful things that you're going to be able to see during the spring, featuring the musicians of the Tucson Symphony Orchestra, featuring interviews, featuring concert previews, and all types of wonderful content for you to tide you over until we come back in the fall as the Tucson Symphony Orchestra on this stage. So, Jose, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you're staying healthy and happy over there, and we can't wait to see you back here in Tucson again. And we'd like to thank all of you very, very much for tuning in today. Goodbye, stay healthy, and stay safe, and take care of each other.
Goodbye.